Thank you very much for joining us at this webinar where we're going to be talking about quizzes. And quizzes is actually a really broad area. There's quite a lot of information. So we have actually divided this into two different webinars. So this is part one that we're going to be dealing with today, and there is going to be a part two. So thanks very much for everyone joining us. I'm just going to hand over to Chengwen, my colleague who is here with us from SILT as well, just to say hi. Over to you, Chengwen.
Hi everyone, Chengwen from the Academic Staff Development Team, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Kath.
Great, thanks Chengwen. Right, so we are going to dive straight in.
Would Max or you want to press that record now? Are we recording?
Yes, the recording is going at the moment, so we're all good on that front. Thanks for checking, Chengwen. Right, so we are going to dive right into quizzes. As I said, this is part one because it's quite an extensive area. And we just want to say up front that as this is a new platform that we are diving into, things are constantly being improved and refined. So the slides that you're seeing at the moment is as the functionality is reflecting at the moment. And as things change or evolve, we will actually update these slides because we give you access to these slides post the webinar. If you come back to the slides at a later date and see something has slightly changed, don't get alarmed. It just means that we have kept the slides up to date with new functionality and processes as they work within Amathuba. So today we're going to take a look at the first or basic area of quizzes, and I will be going quite quickly through this. But as I said, we will give you the link to the recording and the slides afterwards. So you are welcome to go back and revise or, reflect on certain areas where you would like to spend a bit more time. So just to let you know that this will be quite a brisk moving through quizzes. And this is what we were going to cover today, is basically creating a new quiz and looking at the properties, restrictions, assessment and submission views. Those are all elements that you can look at within the creation of a new quiz. We're going to be looking at a basic way to add questions to a quiz. There are many ways to actually add questions and reuse questions across different quizzes, but we're just going to be looking at the single basic functionality of adding questions to quizzes. And then we're looking at the different question types that are available in Amathuba. Some of them are very similar. If you are familiar with those within Vula, there's quite a bit of overlap, and some of them are a little bit different. And then we're going to be looking at how to shuffle questions and pagination within the quiz itself, and then see what is available on the action menus, both at a quiz level and at a higher level within the quiz tool itself, and then touching really briefly, if we have some time at the end, on some of the statistics that you can actually draw out from a quiz. So jumping right in, the quiz tool, I'm sure that you're all here because you have probably in some way used a quiz tool, maybe in Vula before. So you're probably familiar with what actually happens with the quiz tool, but it basically allows you to create and manage point-measured assessments, which is to be used to evaluate users' learning. And as I mentioned, there's many ways to add questions to quizzes. We're going to look at a basic way today, but you can also use a question library. And in Vula, that used to be called the question pool. And we are going to take a look at how to organize these quizzes into categories. Categories makes it easier for you to actually find your quizzes with similar or related content, because you can create your own categories and you can categorize your quizzes into those categories. So it's a way of sorting your quizzes. And quizzes are often used as a way to actually evaluate. You can do it in a formal way or some kind of informal kind of self-assessment as well. And we're also going to be looking today a little bit at the statistics right at the end of this webinar if we have time. But a lot of the stuff here might seem slightly familiar to you, but you can also experiment in your own sandbox. If you don't have a sandbox and you would like one, just let us know at the end of this webinar so we can organize that for you as well. So we're going to jump right into actually going to where Amathuba is residing at the moment, which is at amathuba.uct.ac.za. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with this URL. And you will know that you log in by using the UCT login button, which is right in the center of the page there. And you'll be using your regular credentials, your UCT credentials, which is your username and password that you use to access the other UCT systems. So once you are logged in, you will land on the home page, which is the institutional home page, and it will look very similar to this. And this is where you can access the courses that you are aligned to. Some of the courses might be your own courses that you've created. So in other words, you're in a lecturer role and you can edit and create content, or you might even be aligned to courses maybe in a student capacity. But all of the courses that are aligned to your particular profile will be accessible from this home page. And there's two ways you can jump into your courses. Most people use the cards, which are visible there on the front. So you can use those, or you can use the waffle icon, which is the top right-hand corner. It looks like the little squares. That will give you a complete full listing of all the courses that you are aligned to. So to jump into a course view, here we are on a course homepage. Now you can see that across the top, we have the navigation bar there. And to actually find the quizzes tool, the easiest and fastest way is to go under activities, and you'll see it's the third option on the drop down. You can go to quizzes. There is another way to access the quizzes, and that is to go via manage course and to go to course admin, because course admin will actually give you an interface to all of the tools that are available within your course. So once you are into the quizzes page, you will land on a page where you are able to create a new quiz. So let's take a look at how to create a new quiz. So once you are on this page where you're going to be creating your quizzes, you will see it's quite intuitive. There is a big bold blue button there that says new quiz. And that is where we're going to be starting off to create your new quiz. If you have never created any quizzes before in the particular course that you're working in, your page will look very similar to this, which is pretty blank. So there's no previous quizzes created. But now we're going to start creating our first one by clicking on New Quiz. So once you click on New Quiz, these are some of the elements that you are going to engage with to actually create your quiz. Now, it looks pretty busy here, but what I've tried to do is highlight the different elements in different colors that are quite important. So right at the top, just to take note in the red outline there, you'll see there are actually a number of tabs. So everything that you're seeing here, this is not the full complement of all the settings and things that you can work with to create a new quiz. This is just the settings that are available on the first tab, which is called Properties. You'll see the next tab along is called Restrictions. The next one is called Assessment, and the next one is Submission Views. So each of those tabs is very important, and we're going to take a look at each of the elements that are contained within those tabs. So just to remember that those tabs are quite important. Then below that, we are now on the Properties tab, you'll see the title. So next to the title, you'll see a small asterisk. That means that this particular field is required. It's mandatory. You do need to give your quiz a title. Below that, you will see category. So categories are not mandatory, but as we mentioned at the start, categories are a way for you to organize your quizzes, because over time, you'll end up creating more and more and more quizzes. And when you land on the quizzes page initially, you'll see a huge long list of quizzes, and it can sometimes be tricky to find the quiz that you need to really quickly. So by creating categories, you can create an order to your quizzes. So it's kind of advisable to create categories. If you decide subsequently that you want to move a quiz between a category or create a new category, that's very easy to do. It's not something that you have to do up front. You can work on it as you go along. Below that, you'll see is the quiz questions section, and that is where you will actually get to add the questions to your quiz. And then in the collapsed view at the bottom, you'll see there's three elements there. There's a description, a page header and footer, and optional advanced properties. So those are collapsed at the moment, but we will have a look in detail and see what is underneath each of those elements. And then right at the bottom, you'll see that is the area where you will save or save and close if you have finished working on a particular quiz. So in the description and the page header, footer, and the other one that was there previously, these are all optional areas. You don't have to fill them in. But if you would like to, this is where you can add a description. So a description is something that a student would see before they actually take the quiz. It gives them a little bit of information about the quiz. So if there was something important you needed to convey to them about the quiz prior to them actually jumping in and starting the first question, this is where you could enter that information. Just note at the top of the area where you would be entering that text, you will see little radio buttons. So you can see it says on and off. So if you have information filled in there and the toggle is on off, the student will not see this information. So you need to click the on radio button for students to be able to see the description if you would like them to see that. And similarly with the page header and footer, as the term implies, it's something that they will see persistently throughout the quiz. So if there was something important or there was some kind of graphic element you would want to include as a header or footer consistently throughout the quiz, this is where you would add it here. And again, to make sure that that radio button on is selected if you would want your students to see that. Right, on the next slide, we're going to take a look at right at the bottom, you'll see that there's something called optional advanced properties. So this is where you can select things. Again, these are not mandatory, they're completely optional. You can allow hints, you can disable a right click, and you can also disable email, instant messages, and alerts. So these are just optional additional things that you can impose on a quiz when you're setting it up for the student. And you will find these again on the properties tab. They are absolutely completely optional. And at the bottom there, you'll see the notification email. So that is if you want one or many email addresses to be notified when users actually complete quizzes. Lee, I see you've got your hand up.
Just to confirm, when you're saying disable email, instant messages and alerts, are you talking about within the Amathuba application, or are you talking about on the desktop that they're working on as well? Just to confirm.
Okay, so this is a setting that you can pose on the quiz, on this particular quiz that you are setting up for when a student is actually taking it. So it means that when the student is, it's a restrictive functionality. So when a student is engaging in the quiz, you can disable the email and instant messaging and alerts which would come through. So it's kind of like, it's not the same as a Respondus lockdown browser, but if you're familiar with that, it's a way of imposing a restriction. So trying to restrain them from maybe engaging in emails or sending emails out to other people.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Right, on the next screen, we're going to have a look at the second tab along, because remember I said there are 4 tabs at the top when you're creating a new quiz. So now we've gone through all the elements that were on the properties tab, and now we're going to have a look at what is on the restrictions. So the first thing at the top there we have is the visibility. So if you're familiar with working with other content in Amathuba and in Vula, you know that there's ways where you can make content visible or hide. So similarly with a quiz, you can hide it from users or make it visible to users. Then below that is a section that deals with dates. So we've got a due date, a start date, and an end date. Now we chatted a little bit about this in terms of assignments in our previous webinar. So the start and the end date, you'll see that it's under a section called availability. So that means on the start date at the designated time, this quiz will become available to a student. In other words, it will show up in their list of quizzes as being something that they can engage in. And similarly, at the end date, it would then remove that access to the quiz. So they would still see the quiz name listed on their list of quizzes, but they would no longer be able to click on it and actually engage with that particular quiz. So start and end date relates to the availability for the student to be able to actually access and engage in that quiz. And at the bottom there, you'll see the release conditions. So again, this is completely optional. It's not mandatory at all. But should you want to impose a release condition, which means that the student has to do the designated item that you want them to do prior to be able to actually engage in this quiz, this is where you could set up the release condition here. So you can either attach an existing release condition. Maybe you've set up a release condition for some other content in Amathuba and you can reuse that, or you can set one up by clicking on Create and Attach. When you click on the Create and Attach button, you will see that it's going to give you a window which asks you to select the condition type. And the condition type will give you a drop-down list as represented on the right. That's not the whole comprehensive list. That's just a screenshot of the top of it. So there's quite a lot there. But let's just take the example of under checklist. It says completed checklist. So say you wanted them to have completed the checklist before they're allowed to access this particular quiz. You would select completed checklist from that condition type, and then below that, once you'd selected that, you would select which checklist you wanted them to complete, and then that would be set to this particular quiz, meaning that the student had to complete and comply by that release condition before they're actually allowed to engage in this quiz. So it's just a method of control. Right, on the next screen, there's some additional optional advanced restrictions that you can set as well. So these are some of the similar things that were available in Vula as well. So completely optional, you can set a password if you want to. You can also restrict the IP range of people engaging in this particular quiz. And you can also set timing options. So you can see here that you can have no time limit. So in other words, it means that it's completely free. They can take as much time as they want to complete it. You can have a recommended time limit. So that's really like or what you call almost like a soft time limit. So you can set it, say, for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then once that time has expired, nothing happens. It just says that you've taken longer than the recommended time. Or you can have the very stringent one, which is to enforce the time limit. And once you select the option to enforce a time limit, you will see that there's different options, sort of a subset of options that you can apply in that instance. So once the enforced time limit is reached, what is it that you would like to happen after that? You can decide if you would like to impose a grace period, so X amount of minutes before it is flagged as exceeding the time limit, and then you can decide what kind of behavior you would like to have once the time limit is reached. So you can see there the options are to allow the student to continue working. You can prevent the student from making any further changes, or you can allow the student to continue working but automatically score the attempt as 0 after an extended deadline. Lee, you have your hand up.
Just a quick question with that soft time limit. Are you able to apply that to questions as well, or is that only to the entire quiz itself? Like,
It's
this wouldn't. Okay, so you won't be able to say that this question normally should be like 2 minutes, so that you can pace yourself to make sure you finish the exam.
No, so you couldn't impose that. Yeah, so the time limit is just on the global quiz as a whole. If you wanted to do what you were talking about to kind of give people a guide, what you could do, I suppose, is include that in the description of each of the questions and say something like this question should take you no more than 5 minutes or something like that. But there's no way that you can attach that to a quiz timer. The quiz timer just goes at the global quiz level.
I think maybe you should consider putting that on each quiz or each question, sorry, because sometimes you don't recognize that you're taking extended amount of time on a specific question, then not leaving enough time for the rest of it. It's just as a guide for some students. I see that quite often, especially for your IT exams, that each question is timed so that you can complete the entire thing.
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. That is an option sometimes. And then conversely, just to counter your argument, there's actually been quite a lot of conversation around the use of, having a timer or a line that actually diminishes, or even some kind of indicator of time running out, where they say that some people don't like that at all, because it kind of induces a state of anxiety in the students. So they actually lean completely to the other side and say that there should be actually no indication of time running out, and let students actually just work at their own pace. So many different arguments around the use of a timer within quizzes, but the options are there, and you can decide in your particular context, and also knowing your particular students or people who are going to be engaging in your quiz, whether it be appropriate for you to actually use a timer, and if so, which one would work best in your context.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Lee. Right, let's see on the next slide. Under restrictions, this is the area where you can also grant special access. So remember that special access is either to an individual or to groups that may need to access this particular quiz outside of the sort of start and end dates or due dates that you've already imposed. So if you need to grant an individual or a group of individuals, remember, if you're granting it to a group, you must have set up the group in advance using the group tool. This is where you can do it under special access. So once you click on special access and add users to special access, you will see a window which gives you the properties that you can change. So these changed properties will only apply to either the selected or designated user or selected or designated group that you will choose. So you can change things like the due, start, and end date. You can also change timing for a particular designated group or individual via the special access. And you can also have different time limits and different grace periods, and the behavior that will happen if you choose one of the enforced time limits. So if there's any variation that you need to apply to someone in a special circumstances, this is where you can do it under special access. On the next slide, let's take a look at the other items you can apply there under special access. You can override the attempts allowed. So if everybody else is allowed only one attempt and somebody else needs 3 attempts, you can do this in special access as well and override the default attempts allowed. And at the bottom, that is where you would decide who you're going to apply this to. So you can either do it by users, individuals, or groups. And just to remember that groups need to be set up in advance, and you would select those using the checkbox at the bottom there next to the designated groups or single individual users, and then click the blue add special access button right at the very bottom to actually apply that. Once you had applied that, you would see a confirmation that your selected changes or special access that you had applied would be visible. So I think on the next screen, I think we have okay, we didn't have a screenshot of that, but you will see a confirmation that it has actually been applied. Right, now we're going to move on to the third tab along, which is all to do with assessment. Okay, so on the third tab here, assessment, this is where you can decide about automatically publishing the evaluation. So you can decide about the feedback if you would like to publish that or make that available to students immediately, automatically, as soon as they had submitted. Or if you don't want to, if there's something else that you maybe want to add your own comments or something and publish it later, you can decide that over here. You can also decide whether this quiz is going to count for points or not. So if it's going to have count for points, you can decide if you would want this to be a grade item in the grade book. So it can still count for points, and you can decide not to put it in the grade book. So this is where you would decide that over here under grade item. And synchronized to gradebook would mean that once the score had been allocated, it would synchronize and be sent through immediately to the gradebook if you would like to select that. And then here under attempts, this is where you would set how many times you allow a person to actually attempt this quiz. So it can go all the way all the way through to unlimited and apply that. And then if you are going to allow multiple attempts, this is where you can also set which of these grades you would like to keep. So are you going to keep the highest attempt, the lowest attempt, the average of all the attempts, the first or the last? That is where you can decide that over here. So under assessments, that is where you'll find all of these settings relating to points, grades, attempts, and whether you would like to publish the feedback immediately. And the last tab is to do with submission views. So a submission view is the view, the message that the student would see once they'd actually submitted and concluded the quiz. What is it that you want the student to see? So they have what they call a default view. And when you're in Amathuba and you click on that blue wording that says default view, it'll show you what a student would usually see. And usually that is just a confirmation message saying you've concluded the quiz name, the date, and the time. So it's essentially just a timestamp and saying that your quiz has been successfully submitted. However, you can elect to add in what they call additional views. So additional views, or you can alter the default view, gives you the option to give them a bit more information, more than just the basic to say your quiz has been submitted on this date and time. So on the next screen, let's take a look at what is available to the student if you choose to add in some more information. So if you would like to create an additional view, you can actually name the view if you want to. So this one I've just called comprehensive because I'm going to try and give the student as much information as possible. So you give it a title and you say what it is about, and then you can decide what it is that you would like them to see. So on the right-hand side here, you can see that it says show questions. So if I select yes, that means at the end, once they've submitted, they'll actually see the questions. You can also decide to show them the question answers, and you can also decide to show them the question score and out of score. So in other words, they can get comprehensive feedback on what it is, all of the questions that they've answered, what they answered, and what the correct answer was. You can also decide to show attempt score and the overall attempt score, and you can also elect to show them some statistics as well. So how are they doing in comparison to the class average, and also the score distribution. So all of these are optional. You can check the check boxes as you would require for the students to actually see more information and feedback about their quiz submission. Just something to take into consideration. If you are creating a quiz and you are going to allow unlimited attempts, so in other words, they can do it as much as they want to. If you create a submission view where you are going to be allowing them to see feedback on their questions and what all the right answers are, it's only going to take them one attempt to actually basically get the memo for them to see all the right answers and then subsequently be able to get all of those right on a second attempt. So just to think carefully through the logical process of how you're setting up your quiz, whether you would want them to see this additional information, and how this works in relation to the other settings that you've put in place for the quiz itself. Right, let's move on and take a look at the next thing, which is adding a question to a quiz. So remember I said there's many ways to actually add questions in, but as this is part one of the quiz webinar, we're going to show you the most simple and rudimentary way to actually add a quiz question. So as you might suspect, we go back into the quiz on the Properties tab, and partway down on the page under the Properties tab, you'll see a button that says Add or Edit Questions. So once you click add or edit questions, you get a little window which will pop up, and it'll offer you two ways to add questions in. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see there's a blue button that says add, and on the right-hand side, there's an option that says import. If you choose the import option, you can upload a file. The file does need to be in a specific format. So it does give you an option to download the template. There is a template there that you can actually download, a CSV, and it gives you a basic breakdown of how you would need to create your questions so that you could use the import functionality. But most people actually use the add option because it's easier to add questions using the kind of the WYSIWYG interface. So once you go add, it'll give you an option to add a new question. It'll either a new question section or question pool. We're going to look at new question at the moment because we're just going to add a single new question. And once you select new question, you'll see there are a variety of different question types that you can pick from. So you've got true, false, multiple choice, multiple select, written response. I'm not going to go through them all. You can see them there, but some of them probably look pretty familiar to you because, as I said, there's quite an overlap with the question types that were available in Vula. So you would pick whichever question type that you would like to add to this particular quiz. Then on the next slide, we are going to take a look at the different question types. So in actual fact, there are 11 different question types that you can add within Amathuba. And as you'll see, some of them look pretty familiar or as you would have expected. Just to note that most of these can be automatic marking or automatic scoring, which is really useful, except for written response, where obviously you would be collecting in sort of a longer response, maybe a number of paragraphs. So that one, while you could allocate a point value, you would need to go in afterwards and manually read through that response and then score it. So the only one here out of these 11, which is manually scored or graded, would be a written response question type. So we're going to very briefly, because there are 11 different question types, and I'm sure some of you are pretty familiar with how these function. We're going to quickly have a look at the different question types. So the very basic one, of course, is the true and false. So you can see here that you would need to, at the top there, next to number 1, you would need to enter the question text. So what is the question that you're going to ask them? Then below that, you will have the options, true and false. And in those round circles, you would indicate what the correct answer is. So is this a true statement or is it a false statement? And then under the third option there, points. This is where you can allocate how many points is this going to be worth. By default, every time you create a quiz question, it'll put 1 in there because there is no option to add a question to a quiz that scores 0. The minimum value is 1. You have to give it a point value. So it'll give it 1 by default, but you can change that to anything you want to. Then at the top right-hand corner under options, some of the question types have additional options. So under true and false, the additional options that you have available to you are to add some feedback on this particular question, to add a hint, to add a short description, and to also add enumeration in front of the options. Seeing as this is true and false and you only have those 2 options, it probably doesn't need to have enumeration in front of it because it's either true or false, but this is where you could add that in if you want to. And then once you'd set all of those items, you would go to the bottom and click save. You will also notice the little drop down arrow next to the save button where it says save and new or save and copy. So save and new just means that you're in the editing mode, and instead of getting thrown out of the editing mode, you can actually just carry on working and have another new question that you're going to edit up. Or if you wanted to use this as something of a template almost, you could actually choose save and copy, and then on your copy just make the small tweaks or edit that you would need to make this into a different question. So note that you can save, save and new, or save and copy. The next question type we're going to take a look at is multiple choice, also very familiar to everybody, I'm sure. So again, you must have your question text, which is right at the top. That's the mandatory field because that's the most important thing. Then underneath that, by default, you'll be given 4 options. You don't have to have 4. If you want to get rid of them and only have 3 options, you can click on the X on the right-hand side to eliminate that. Similarly, if you would like more options, at point number 3 there, it says add answer. You could add in many, many more options if you wanted to. Then below that, an important setting to note is to randomize the answer order. So if you would like these options to shuffle for each presentation of this particular question, that is where you would click that checkbox to randomize the answer order. Then again, you would set your points. You can see there by default it goes to 1, but you can select any number of points. Then right at the top right-hand corner, the options that are associated with this one are to add a hint, add feedback, add a short description, add custom weights, and enumeration. As you saw, enumeration is just in front of the answers. You can add like 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C if you would like to. Custom weights means that you can make different answers weigh different amounts in terms of the point value. And we'll take a little bit of a look at that on some of the subsequent slides. Here we go on the multiple choice, looking at the custom weights. So if you wanted to, you could add that here. So if it says here, if you have more than one possible solution, you can weight the answer according to the correctness of a possible answer. So for example, you could try and make it a little bit tricky and have some answers that were actually more correct than others. So you would still give them some points, but you could actually give them part points for getting a partially or a less correct answer than another one. So this is where, if you wanted to go to that deeper level of assigning points, you could actually add custom weights and decide which of the answers options were more correct than others and reward them accordingly. Right, the multi-select is very similar. So I'm not going to go through all of the options here. They're pretty self-explanatory, but one of the important aspects to notice on this multi-select question type is at the bottom is the scoring options. So at point number 6 there at the bottom, you see it says, how are points assigned to blanks? Okay, so here we have the option of all or nothing, correct selection. So in other words, they're allocating per number of options you've got there, correct answers, and then right minus wrong. So the right minus wrong is an interesting one because in Vula, you were able to have what they call negative marking. So just to note that in Amathuba, there is no negative marking, but the closest option that you have to getting something similar, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar functionality, is to choose the right minus wrong option. So say, for example, you put your options there. If they chose the right one, but they also chose several wrong ones, it's possible to actually whittle away the marks that they've actually gained from the correct answer. So this multi-select has a different selection of point scoring options to some of the other question types. So here is just an elaboration of what I was actually talking about here in terms of the points assigned. So you can see on the left-hand side, that gives you a quick synopsis of what the different point scoring options are. And in also to note that this one, the options are similar to the options that were on the other question types by adding feedbacks, hints, descriptions, and enumeration to the answer options. Written responses, remember, is where you can gather in a longer response. And remember that this is a manually graded question, so it can't be automatically graded. So you would add your question text at the top as you would for all the other question types. You can see there, point number 2 says enable the HTML editor for learner responses. So that is similar to Vula, where you could either allow them a text box where they're just going to be typing in plain text. However, if you enable the HTML editor, it means they have additional formatting options. So they can apply things like headings or bulleted lists or numbered lists. So sometimes adding the HTML editor is a good idea. In relation to that, you'll see that I've highlighted the fact that when they are typing in their answer, depending on how long the response is going to be, and obviously their typing speed, sometimes it's a good idea to get them to actually compose their written response on another editor. So in other words, in Microsoft Word, for example, get them to type up their response there. And once they've actually finished their response, to actually copy and paste that into the written response field, because sometimes if they are busy working in the written response field and the page actually refreshes, it's possible that they might lose their response because they're still in the editing mode. And if a page refreshes, it could wipe out their response. So it's a good practice if you have a long question for them to compose it in a different software editing package and then copy it across. And then you can see point 3 there also says allow learners to insert images and add attachments. So if that's going to be imperative to the response that you're seeking, make sure that you tick that option as well. And you can see the options are very similar to the other question types with feedbacks, hints, and descriptions. You'll see a new one there that says add answer key. The answer key is only for the people who are doing the marking. The students do not see this. So think of it almost as a model answer. This is where you could add in an answer key or a model answer for those people marking. Remember, this is a manually graded question. So if there were certain elements that needed to be present in the response, you could add this into the answer key to guide the marking of this question. And then add a custom response box size just means that the area, the field size that you're going to give them to actually type in their response, you can govern how big that text box is. It doesn't mean that it restricts the amount of text that can go in there. It's just, think of it as the size of the window, how much of the response you can see at any one time. And then you can also add initial text. So if you wanted them to start their response in a particular standard way, you could type in the first couple of bits of text for them at the start. Short answer, as the name implies, it's automatically marked. So we're basically looking for something really short. It's either a single word or it could be 2 words, but it's or a short phrase, but it's something that's going to be very standard because it's going to be automatically marked. So you would again add in your text. You could add in here, it can be a text response, it can be case sensitive text if that's really important, or regular expression. You can add additional blanks in. So blanks are the area where the student is going to be adding in their response. You can change the point value as you can with all the other question types. And you can also decide on how the points are assigned to the blanks. So the blanks are the fields where the students are going to be typing in their responses. So here you can decide if the learners are going to receive a part mark per blank, or if the learners must answer all of the blanks correctly. So that's just different point scoring options you've got for this particular question type. Again, you can add feedback, hints, and descriptions if you would like to. Moving on to the next one, this is kind of similar, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we have the multi-short answer. So there's multiple areas where they can actually add in, and here you can actually have weighted options as well. So that's slightly different to the previous one on the scoring options. So they're going to be adding in multiple different short answers, and you can add different weightings for each of the different options that are there. But just to note that the maximum point value is reflected by 100% weight. So it's recommended best practice that each of the possible answers weight calculation equals 100. Right, on the next screen, you can see fill in the blanks. So this is pretty self-explanatory. So if you're going to have blanks, then you can either have it in the sort of it could be a phrase where you're going to have a little bit of text, then a blank and a bit more text, and then a blank where they need to fill it in. You can also, in this question type, add or insert an image as well. So on the next screen, let's have a look at that. So when you actually are creating a fill in the blanks, you will see that when you're composing this question, you'll have what they call text and blank. So the text is where you would actually write in your bit of text that you're going to have, and then you would add in a blank where the student would need to add in their response. And similarly, you would compose the question by adding in blocks of text and then blank, text and blank, and text and blank as you go along. Right, let's take a look at matching. So matching is obviously kind of lining up one set of options with another set of given options. So just to note that on this one, you would obviously add in your choices and your matches. So in other words, the two options that are going to be matched together. And interesting just to note there at point number 3 that matches are randomized when taking the questions. So it means that if students are getting this question given to them during quiz, they're not going to see it in the same order all the time. It's going to randomize the matches each time. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see what that would look like. So here's just an option. You can see here's a question that says match the moons with their corresponding planets. So you can see that you've got your list of planets there and your list of moons. So in order to match, what you would do on the drop-down list is the drop-down list would give you a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as the options are presented there, and you would choose the corresponding number to actually match those elements up. Right, the next question type you're going to take a look at is ordering. So as the name implies, you are actually putting elements in order. And similar to the way that the matching works, whereby you actually lining up numbers, the ordering also works in that way as well. So you actually order by virtue of numbers that are presented on a drop-down list. I think on the next slide, I think we might have, a visual of that. So you can see in the bottom right hand corner, so if you had something like arrange these numbers from smallest to largest, you would have your numbers there 8, 1, 10, 5, but in the drop down list you would use that to actually order the elements. Just to note as well, I've highlighted there on the left hand side that the items are randomized when taking the question. So again, it randomizes them automatically for you. The next question type we're going to take a look at, there's two that support scientific notation and mathematical notation, and these are the arithmetic and the significant figures type of questions. So these are usually used very specifically by certain faculties. So if it's really important that you have questions that support that kind of notation, you would use either of these question types. So the good thing about the arithmetic question type on the next slide is that you can actually make the question appear differently for every single student. So instead of typing in a static question, you can actually generate a question by virtue of a formula. So that is where you would enter it into the formula field over there, and then the supported operations, functions, and constants that you can actually use are listed on the right-hand side there. So you could draw up a formula which would present differently for each of the students based on your formula. I think on the next slide, you have an option to see where you would insert the variables. So this is where you would add in the variables that will be inserted into the formula that you would use to actually generate the question. And there is an option here when you're actually composing this arithmetic question type to actually test your formula to make sure that it is actually working and functioning as expected. And again, the options with this one, you can have an optional hint or feedback if you want to. And then similarly, the significant figures question type also supports this annotation as well. So you can also insert an image here as well, and you can also allow an attachment to support an answer. So the student can add in their answer, but if you would like to see their workings out, you can check the checkbox right at the bottom there that says allow attachments to support answers. So here, similarly, you can draw up a formula. So it will generate a new question based on your formula for each student. And again, the list of supported functions and constants and operations are similar to the previous arithmetic question type, and they're listed on the right-hand side there. And again, there is an option to actually test your formula. You can see the test button there to make sure that it's all working correctly before actually publishing this quiz. And here is the option where you would insert the variables that would be used within your formula. So these two question types are somewhat similar in the way that they're actually drawn up, the significant figures and the arithmetic question type. You can also click preview on your question to actually see how it would be presented to the student. And that is consistent with all the question types. There's always a preview option to make sure that the layout is as you would require for that particular question. Right, shuffling and pagination. So we've seen that in certain question types, it will shuffle or randomize the options for you, but you can also make sure that it does that at a quiz question level as well. So as you might expect on the properties tab within the questions, for the quiz questions, you can actually decide on how many questions you would like per page. Now, you know, in Vula, we always used to recommend that each question was presented on a new page. So we similarly suggest that here as well. So you would just enter in one. So that means that once they've actually answered a particular quiz question and they click next, it actually loads in a new page so that you don't have a huge amount of questions all presented at once on one page. So it's one question per page. Then the next one is paging. So paging in this instance means you could potentially prevent students from moving backwards and forwards through the pages. So once they've answered a question and they've clicked next to move on to the next page and next question, you can restrict them from going back and changing their mind. And then shuffle is shuffling the questions at the quiz level. So the questions themselves are being presented in a different order, which is different to some of the other shuffling options or randomizing options that you saw, where they were randomizing the options within a question. So just to note that these options here of questions per page, paging, and shuffling, these only become apparent, these options only become apparent once you've actually added questions to your quiz. Prior to adding any questions, you will not see these options available to you. Right, we're going to quickly have a look at what we call the action menu and the options that are available under the action menu. So when you are looking at your list of quizzes, at the top, you'll see there's a button that says more actions. And so next to more actions, there's a drop-down list where you can see the options are reorder, make visible, hide, and delete. So just to note that the last three options on that drop-down list, make visible, hide, and delete, those are aligned to what we call multi-action functions. So multi-action functions mean that you need to make a selection first, either an individual quiz or use the top checkbox to select all of the quizzes before you can apply any of those options. So if you're going to, for example, delete a quiz, you need to have selected the designated quiz first and then click delete. So all three of those options in the red square are what we call multi-action functions and need to be used in conjunction with selecting or selecting all. The one at the top, which is called reorder, that is quite useful. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see with reorder, what it means is that you can decide how you would like your quizzes presented on the page. Now, remember, this is just for you, for your purposes as a lecturer. Which quiz would you like near the top of the list? Which would you like near the bottom of the list? And you would use the drop-down list on the right-hand side to select the sort order. So this is a nice way for you to actually put your quizzes in order. Once you've done that, you would just click save and it would save your order. Next to each quiz itself, you'll see, yes,
We
I
have a
see.
question in the chat. don't know.
Demisa is just saying she needs to
Okay.
go. So thanks for being
Awesome.
with us, Demisa. And yes, you may definitely catch up with the recording afterwards. Thank you. So next to each quiz, you'll see a drop-down list, and you can see a lot of those options are pretty self-explanatory. That's where you would go in and edit a particular quiz or hide it from users. You can also preview it, delete it, copy it, grade it, and do reports and statistics. Also to note, the top right-hand, you have 2 different views available to you. You can either view by availability or you can view by category. Remember, categories we spoke about earlier on. You can set up your categories and decide which quizzes you would like to put into categories, and it's a good way to use it to sort your quizzes. Once you've chosen your selected view, you do need to click the apply button to be able to see that filtered view. A very handy option is bulk edit. So on the previous slide, you'll see that there's an option to actually click the checkbox right at the top and select either all of the quizzes or individual quizzes and then click bulk edit. When you click bulk edit, you'll see this screen, which gives you the option to change either the name, the category, hide from users, or change the attempts allowed for each of the selected quizzes. So it's just a really quick way of changing multiple settings for multiple quizzes all at one time. And next to the quizzes, depending on what functionality you have invoked, you might see little icons appearing. So some of the icons, the more common ones, there are more than this, but these are the common ones. So if a quiz is hidden, you'll see the little eye with the line through it. That means that students can't see this. And if there is a little key, that means special access. Someone or some group of people has special access. There's special access granted in this particular quiz. And if you see the other one that looks like a vertical little key, it means that it's associated with a grade item. So in other words, points are being scored and these points are being fed through to the grade book. As we mentioned, there are some basic statistics available, and this you can see on a quiz level, and you can also see it at a higher level as well. So there's 2 ways to get to the statistics. So you can see the statistics for a particular quiz by clicking on the action menu next to the designated quiz and selecting statistics, or you can use the statistics link right at the top of the quiz page. So let's jump in and see what we can see on statistics. So once you get to the statistics page, you'll see there are 3 tabs there. So the first one is user stats, then we have question stats, and we have question detail. So this is a very rudimentary view at the moment. It's probably statistics of 1 submission. But you can see that it gives you a basic graph, gives you a class average, and then if there were more people who had taken this quiz, you would see them listed there below where you can see their overall quiz grade. And the useful thing here is that you can actually export this to CSV or to Excel as well. Just to let you know that there are some additional resources and support in terms of quizzes, because I know we've been through quite a bit of information really, really fast. As mentioned before, we will give you the recording and the slides post this webinar, but there is a quiz guide available on the SILT website. We will provide you with the link to that as well. And then there are Amathuba resources for both staff and students available on the SILT website as well. We will provide you with these links after this webinar when we follow up with the email. In addition to that, for support, you are welcome to email silt-helpdesk@uct.ac.za. And for additional questions or feedback, please email us at Amathuba at uct.ac.za. Thank you, everybody, for attending this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to either type them into the text chat or raise your hand now. If you think of something subsequently, please use those email addresses that we will supply to you, and we will also follow up with the resources. I want to also thank Chengwen for sharing the slides. Thank you very much.